So the first thing that I think clients should know and understand before embarking on creating a new house or even a remodel is that it is a process, and that process can feel long at times. And I would describe it as being a marathon and not a sprint. So be prepared for a marathon.
It sounds like a very, a very risky business to get into.
Yeah, potentially. I think a lot of times people approach creating a house more in a transactional sense. Let me just hire an architect, tell me what it is. Okay, boom, let's build it, let's go. But when you're creating a residence for somebody, it takes a lot more time at almost all the phases, and the process is a little more nuanced than that. I'll give kind of an analogy that was told to me by a contractor, which I think was great. He said that designing and building a house is not like just buying an iPhone that exists on a shelf, which is very, very transactional, very quick. It's more like commissioning a whole group of professionals of different types to try and design and fabricate the first iPhone. It's to say that every house that we embark on is always going to be new and is always going to be different, even though certain things are carried over from one project to the next. And so therefore, it is a process. It's a journey you go on with the team, with the architects, the designer, and the contractor.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I think the project timeline could be very lengthy. Mm-hmm. And for people who've never gone through one, I would say that it's typically broken down into several phases, mm-hmm. right? So you probably have heard of conceptual design, schematic design, design development, construction documents, construction administration. Those are kind of like the big chapter, the big milestones along the way. And it's split that way, not so much to like put fancy words on the project process, but much more to try to keep it organized and move forward and make progress at every step, right? Mm-hmm. Like it gets more and more detail as you move toward actually building the real thing than it is at the very beginning.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that some of those can go quicker than others. I'll give a good example of why it's important to take time at certain phases. The construction document phase is one segment that's important because during the construction documents, which of course those are the drawings the architect produces that the contractor builds from more or less. During that phase, clients often will want to push through as fast as possible because they're not really involved in construction documents. They're very technical. So the designer is the one who's producing it. And it's like, okay, we'll produce it faster for me. The thing is with CDs, construction documents, is that we are basically problem solving, building construction issues before they happen in the field. And it's always faster and also much cheaper to solve construction issues in a drawing than it is with actual material. And so that's a good example of like, that's one phase you don't necessarily want to rush through.
Yeah, and the construction documents is a good example of things taking time. I think also the design phase needs a certain amount of time. Oftentimes clients are very excited just moving forward quickly. I need a kitchen, I need a bathroom. Like we don't need to reinvent the wheel. Mm-hmm. Therefore, why does it take so long to design it? And the answer is that it's not that, every single corner needs to be designed and detailed in like a very complicated way. I think it's much more that design is like a stew. You need to cook it slowly for a little while so it tastes good in the end. If you rush it, you're going to miss things. If you design a kitchen, let's say, you got to make sure that the door can open without hitting the handle of the door next to it. Mm-hmm. Small things like that are not just about the aesthetic, but about the functionality and already kind of foreseeing potential issues that could trigger in the next phases.
Yeah. And there's a certain pace that projects have. And that pace and that rhythm is something that we can feel and sense, and we know what it should be like. Contractors know, professionals know. First-time clients in particular, they have no idea. Every day is a new day. And you kind of want to hit a good stride like a marathon, right? You don't want to burn out. And I think when people approach a project like a sprint, I mean, think about it this way, like to do a ground-up home, it takes somewhere between at the low end of 18 months if it's simple, to 3 years if it's complex, to beyond that if you're doing something large or complicated. So 18 months is a really long time, so is 3 years. And if you take the sprint mentality and you try to keep that for 3 years, there's no way it's going to work. It's going to be, first of all, super stressful to the client. Going back to the pace and the kind of the rhythm, you want to be in that flow. And I think for clients, when they push the design phase too quickly, one of the things that can happen is they make decisions too quickly.
Yeah.
And then a week later, they're like, actually, I don't know. Let me go back and change my mind. And that's a very good example of what you want to avoid, because that almost ends up taking more time in the end. It's better to just have taken that full week or 2 weeks, think about it, make a decision you're sure with, and then move forward. The worst thing that can happen is if you make progress, of 10 steps ahead, then go back and question, the first decision, because all that needs to be redone and it undoes the foundation that was built up.
And there is different level of decisions that need to be made, right? There is like more of the big picture one that I think are very important. And then there is the more detailed one, which maybe those could be made a little bit more quickly, But I think rushing on the big picture decision to me is, it's like, how many houses are you going to do in your life? If that's the only one, maybe take an extra week.
Yeah. For sure.
The other thing I would want to say is that, it's a long process. And I feel like oftentimes clients feel like then when construction starts, things take forever, like it's not moving fast enough. And so I would want to warn clients who are about to embark on a construction journey that probably the first, let's say, like first third or first half of the construction phase is going to feel like nothing's happening. And that's typical to any single project. I think it's hard for people to see all of the prep work of the site that needs to happen, the excavation, the pouring the foundation, all of that, like base that needs to be set properly in order to build up from there. So don't be alarmed. It's going to feel slow up until maybe like halfway through that.
But I think that rule applies to even the design phases.
Yeah.
Like I think what happens probably from a client's perspective is like there are swaths of time where like nothing's happening and then all of a sudden a lot's happening at once. So in construction, like it's a bunch of prep work and whatnot, and then all of a sudden you have concrete foundations. Nothing's happening. Framing, for example, framing happens super quick. All of a sudden you have framing. And there's a gap from framing to finishing out, which is like huge. You get to the site and like nothing's happening. It's because the builders are doing a lot of things behind the scenes. And behind the scenes, that term applies also to design. There's a lot of things we do behind the scenes to problem solve the stuff you mentioned that clients don't necessarily see. And so it's a bit of an odd thing for them. So I think it comes back to just trusting what the professionals say. If they tell you, look, we need this much time to make sure it's correct. And that leads to the second point. The second thing you should know before starting a project is that you have to hire the right team. That is like a must.
So what do you mean by the right team?
Well, there's the big key players. There's the architect / designer, and there's the contractor, and then the engineer. The engineer, you would rely on the contractor or the architect to find a good one if you don't know any. So really, it's the architect and the contractor. Those are the people you need to trust. And there's many reasons why you need to have the right team. There's quality, there's trust, there's all of these things. But one of them that I think is underrated is this idea that design and construction is a team effort. It's a team project. It's a group effort. So all of us have been part of group projects, in high school and college, in the profession, whatever. Imagine you're on a team with people and it requires close collaboration and there's a lot of money at stake and you're going to be with that team for, let's say, 2 years, right? And you, the client, you're in that team. You would be like, I'm going to be very specific on who I'm working with for the next 2 years because I have to be. And so when you're going to find your contractor, your architect, your et cetera, and you're the client, find people you trust, yes, but also find people who are going to work well together. If they don't work well together.
And that goes back to actually do your homework. We meet oftentimes clients who, maybe have hired the first person that was recommended to them, either like some friends had a great contractor or they had the best architect and, they recommend them to the client. And while that's great, it always comes from referral most of the time. I would say still do your homework, go and interview these people, go and see projects that they've done, ask for references, just go get coffee and have a casual conversation to see if actually you have anything in common and like you could communicate and you vibe well together. I think it's super important because like you say, it's a long relationship and you want to feel comfortable, reaching out to this person as much as you need to.
I will say, you had mentioned clients you have a friend of a friend who's a contractor, or my neighbor used this person, can't we use that person? It's really challenging because it's really all about trust. And I have to say that most often when a client says, oh, I have a contractor as a friend, I'm going to use them, like 85% of the time, they're not the right person for the job. The thing is, and this gets to contractor selection, which is not the topic, but there's a whole wide array of different expertise when it comes to builders and architects, right? And you have this sea of options, and it's about finding the right 10% of those people that are the right fit for your specific project. And the chances are that your neighbor's friend is like the perfect person is just realistically not very high. And that gets back to trust. And I would have, again, talk to your architect about that.
And the other thing to ask, I think, when you try to decide who to hire is make sure you understand their process.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a lot of times we've come across people who hired what they thought was an architect / design build, and they actually didn't really know the journey they were going to go through because it was never explained by the other side before, right? But maybe that's a question you could ask them, like, how do you typically work? What do you provide as services? I think people have assumption of like what an architect or a design build or a contractor can provide. And there is a huge variety of possibilities out there. So I think understanding who you're hiring and why you're hiring them for is very important.
By understanding what they're going to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. The third thing you should know before embarking on a home is to expect the unexpected, which is basically a nice way of saying, honestly, that things are not going to go according to plan.
Yeah, some of them.
Absolutely. At some point during construction in particular, there's going to be bumps in the road. Something will happen, and everyone will have to adjust and problem solve this new thing. In terms of construction, that's quite often there's a site condition that no one foresaw, that no one could have seen possibly, and now we have this thing we have to deal with. Or there's a mistake in the field, or there's a material shortage, or something.
There's a pandemic, and windows are going to take 6 months instead of 3.
Exactly. This also goes back to the idea that it's a marathon, right? In the duration of a marathon, there's going to be bumps and bruises along the way. And so a big part of having a successful project is having the right mentality so that when things don't go right, you don't freak out. You say, I was told up front, because I heard it on the show, that something wasn't going to go right, and this is one of those moments, okay, how are we going to deal with it?
Actually, it's great to warn people before they start. Things are going to go wrong. So just be prepared that one day you're going to get an email from somebody saying something's going wrong. Don't be surprised. It happens all the time. I think having the right emotional response to that is very important. Like you said, you don't want to find a solution based on a fear reaction or like an impulse, right? I think first you want to stay very positive. There is a solution for every problem. There is a solution.
The emotional aspect that you brought up is super important because it is stressful, especially during construction, because that's when all of the money is being spent. There's a lot at stake. And houses are tough because if you're 50% through construction or 60% through construction or 70%, which is you're on your way, let's say it all stops at 70%. It doesn't matter. Like the house needs to be done in order for it to be worth anything. So it is a very stressful time and we acknowledge that, but it's really critical to maintain composure throughout.
Yeah.
And I think, clients, that you do have responsibilities. Your responsibility. And actually, a contractor was telling me this as well. Like, your responsibility is to show up to meetings on time. Don't miss meetings. Don't just not show up. It's rude. Be kind to the people you're working with. That includes the people on the site that you might not talk to directly, but the fabricators, the workers, the laborers. Like, be kind to people, and make decisions you're sure of. And then, just in general, just be professional.
Yeah.
Expecting the unexpected also means that you have to have extra money set aside, contingencies, right? Typically, it's around 10% of the construction cost-ish. That varies greatly depending on things. It's around that number, but you should have extra money put aside just in case, because you're going to have to pull from it at some point.
I would say extra money and have some flex room in your schedule as well.
Yes.
Yes.
The fourth point is to ask questions along the way. And I think this is really important because we kind of assume that if you're a client, you don't know how to build a home, you don't know how to design a home, and maybe you've done it a few times in the past, but still, you're probably not the expert.
And you don't have to pretend that you are.
Yeah.
We get that sometimes too, where clients would throw in like some technical words that they've heard on HGTV or something, and they absolutely have no idea what it means, and it's like.
You don't need to do that.
You don't need to do that. It's okay. Like the professionals that you hire for the project are not assuming that you know everything there is to know about what we're doing.
Yeah, it's not necessary. I don't assume to know anything about financial investing in the stock market so much, so you don't need to do that. But I think asking questions is important for the relationship side of things, because it is a relationship essentially that you're going to have with these people for 2-3 years, right? And like any good relationship, its foundation is based on good communication. And if you're one half of that relationship, you're the client, and you're unsure of something, you have a problem, you have to talk to your designer or architect and say, hey, this came up. I'm not sure how I feel about this. Can we talk it out? The worst thing you can do, like in a marriage, is just hold on to it and not say anything for an extended period of time, and then let it blow up and become a huge thing.
Yeah, or it could also just be like you just don't understand a drawing or a detail or how things are going to come together. Rather than wait for it to be built, I would say if you don't get it, just ask your designer. There is other ways that things could be communicated to be clearer. If people can understand plans, for example, or section drawings, right? There is other ways to communicate. So it's also like your one shot at getting the understanding while the thing is being created, because once it's done, it's done. Like there is no going back unless you're doing a remodel of what you just did,
I think everyone being informed throughout is super critical. If there's a way to sort of like mind meld the architect, contractor, and owner together, then a lot of issues would be kind of avoided in a long process. So I think everyone being on the same page is also another way to think about it. Asking questions, being informed. We ask questions our clients all the time to try and understand what they're thinking, to predict which design outcomes are going to be more favorable. And I also like the point you brought up of if you're just not sure of something because you don't get it, then ask. And I think a lot of professionals are more than open and very willing and excited to explain why things are the way they are. I would also say, like in architecture and design, there's this idea that what we do is this great mystery, and we're behind this, like the Wizard of Oz. We do our secretive thing, and no one knows quite how we create our magic, and then we put it out there. And a lot of offices operate that way, and a lot of clients perceive architects or designers that way. And there's some excitement to that. I get it, but I just think that it's more fun and more interesting if everyone understands what's going on and why. And also, frankly, for a lot of clients, it's sort of an educational process, and it's cool for them to learn about, like, why should we put this line here? Why not shift it over by 2 inches? Because I can guarantee you any good architect, they'll have lots to tell you as to why that line should be located precisely where it is.
Yeah. The fifth point is do not try to align a construction completion with a major life event. I would say the major life event already comes with its own package of stress and excitement and pressure and a deadline, right? And all that build up to it. I don't think you need to tack on another one of the same, on top of that. I think that's insane. Construction is always going to take more time than expected. I hate to say that because, when clients ask, like, how long is this going to take to get built? And
we always give a bracket.
And, contractors or architects, like, give a range. It's a range because it's understood that this time is going to have to stretch, most likely. So if you try to time it with, I don't know, like, you getting married or you having a baby or like
someone
something
moving in, someone
moving in, you're just trying to make all of the stars in the universe align that same day, and that just never happens. Maybe one in a blue moon,
Yeah, I think, and this has been said many times before, there's quality, schedule, and budget, right? And you cannot have all three. And that applies to any project for architecture, design, for creating a car, for anything, right? It's nearly impossible to have something's going to have to give in, right? We can go fast and have it be high quality. It's going to cost more, right? We can have really high quality but it might take longer. There's something has to give and have to take. So the other thing that we like to talk to clients about pretty early on is like, when push comes to shove, when things don't go according to plan, of those three things, what are going to give up first, right? And some people will say schedule. It's more important to me that this project turns out of quality. I don't care if it takes an extra 3 months. Other folks, they might say, it is schedule. I have this deadline. It needs to be done. Okay, well then it's either going to cost you more or it's not going to be as high quality. And I hate to sound so harsh about it, but that's like the reality. That's like the physics of a project. And I think it's worthwhile for clients to tell their architects and their contractors those three things, which is the most important to them, even if they don't ask you, because then they know. Everyone is being on the same page, right? And going back to asking questions, like we ask clients questions all the time. That's one of them. But I agree, like in general, still trying to have things line up with a live event is just...
At the end of the day, I think it's just going to add stress. And then I think that making decisions under stress is most likely going to lead to bad decision making.
Yeah.
Because you're not thinking rationally, you're thinking because you're under the motive of something else, some other influence. And you're actually not responding to the decision you have to make.
I agree. And this last point, I think is interesting. All of these, actually, what I'm about to say applies to all of them, is that these are things that we've learned and realized on our own through projects, but it's also stuff when we're talking to all of our architecture fellow compadres and all of the contractors who do really high-end builds. They all say the same stuff, especially that last one. Contractors, they're like, please do not try and have this line up with whatever life event. That's like a number one red flag for contractors when clients try to do that, and they will tell them, like, do not do it.
No, and on a more positive mind too. Like if you line up, let's say a remodel or the construction of a new home with a major life event like a baby or a marriage or whatever, you're actually diminishing the amount of happiness and satisfaction that you could get if you were splitting these two apart from each other. Because if they come at the same time, you won't be able to have as much excitement for either of them as if they were happening in two different timelines.
Yeah.
So I would say, if you could, instead of trying to smash together birthdays and Christmas, just keep them separated. You know what I mean?
More treats for later.
More treats for later.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's good to have deadlines, right?
Yes.
Everyone's like, I want to be done by the end of the year because next year this is happening. Like, that's fine. And, there's different categories of life events. Maybe having a kid, that's like a really big deal. Like that gets very, very scary. And we've seen projects where they try to have it line up that way, and they get to the point of like, let's just stop it. Let's just hit pause because this is not working. Mostly because the client feels like a massive amount of stress, and they're like, this is not working. Let's just pause it. You guys were right. We'll resume this, later on down the line. So in an odd way, a lot of these things comes back to an earlier point I said, which is establishing the right team. And that means trusting them. And if they give you advice and they say, you should really listen to this advice, then you should probably listen to it.
It's not so much that they want to be right and have the final word. It's because it's not their first project and they've seen it and they've done it. And they're just trying to help you out, honestly.
Yeah, I know. And I know that from a client's perspective, almost not all, but a lot of homeowners come to a project, or future homeowners come to a project thinking, I'm going to figure out at least one way in this project to have a quick shortcut because I'm smart enough. We work with smart people. It's true. I'm going to try and like hack the system or figure out a way to have this be different. And that's when you start to get into kind of dangerous territory, I think. Yeah. So boom, summary. Be prepared. Designing, creating a home is a marathon. It's not a sprint. Build up the right team before you start on anything. That is a foundation. And on that marathon, expect things to have little bumps here and there, maybe some big ones even, and you got to work together as stay cool to solve it. And ask questions throughout. Stay informed. Keep the architect informed. Everyone should be informed and on the same page all the time. And then lastly, when it comes to when you want to have this thing done, don't do it like right before you're getting married, right before the wedding. Don't do that. Thank you, everybody, for listening to this show. We hope you liked it and found it helpful. If you have any other questions about this subject or anything related to design, architecture, interiors, construction of homes in particular, then you certainly can reach out to us. Just Google us. We're out there. We exist. But the show itself has a email, which is hello@secondstudiopod.com. There's also a phone number you can text for the show, which is 213-222-6950.
We're also on social media as the podcast, which is Second Studio Pod, and as our office, which is fame_architects. You can follow us on there. You can DM if you have any questions. You can also, if you want to support the show, honestly, just leave a review, either on Apple Podcasts. You can also, I think, rate us on Spotify, subscribe on YouTube. There is many ways you can help this show continue forward.
And we will have many more things that clients should know before creating a custom home in the future. So stay tuned for that.
Yeah.